Yes, as announced, this is long-awaited Apocalypse Librarian 2. Those who weren't here last time or who have forgotten, I play live-action role-playing games. They're kind of like, sort of, if you think of it like a murder mystery weekend, that sort of thing. You go, you dress up as a character, and you go play that character along with a lot of other people in a certain situation. Murder mystery weekend, you're probably going to go and try and solve a murder. The ones I do are a bit different, and this game, which is called Forsaken, is about surviving in a sort of zombie apocalypse scenario. And that means trying to survive in a world where you have to deal with threats like zombies, scary people with guns, fallen angels, that was a new one, and whatever that was. And I'm still not entirely sure. So I decided to play a librarian in all of this. A few reasons really. I wanted to do something that was a bit challenging. I didn't want to go with the sort of skills that would really suit you to this. I thought it was much more interesting to go in with something that was a bit harder to make work in that sort of situation. I wanted to sort of test what it would be like for me in this situation, make it a bit more realistic. And also, I do love libraries, and I wanted to sort of show the value of a library, particularly in a sort of crunch situation like this. This is the sort of the equivalent to a library building that we have, which is a hold-all bag stuffed with books. We've expanded the collection. It's now at least 30. I don't know anymore. So, as it says there, it's important to record who has what, and I did have a notebook that I was using as a catalogue. And this had details of every book that I had, and who had it, and who had had it before, and you know, some notes about what was in it and whether it was useful or not. That's been lost, so I now have no idea who has anything. And that's a bit of a risk because, as it says, books are quite heavy. And if you're, like we are, moving around quite a lot, carrying all of those yourself is a real pain. The best thing you can do is to make sure you lend your catalogue out. And that's good from a library perspective. I would rather that the books are being used, and it sort of motivates me to make sure that I'm only including books that are really necessary. So we have a very sort of streamlined collection of books that are sort of well loved. Now, because it's a lot of carrying these around and moving from place to place, we're also sort of quite keen to make sure that people know what's in the library, and so that's why I sort of show off the collection where I can. When you can stop somewhere where you're no longer under an immediate threat, it's nice to get the library out, put the books out, and sort of physically sort of show people what you've got and invite them over. I think there's lessons for librarianship there in general, like hiding your works doesn't really do anything. Waiting for people to come and find what you've got doesn't lead that many people to the library. But if you can show off your collection, people will take an interest. And since I've started doing that, far more people have started borrowing books from the library. They don't have to carry them. Adding new books is a challenge. It's a dangerous situation out there, and you can't just go to a bookshop. You can't obviously order the books online. You have to go and find them, and out where the books might be, you may also find zombies and other threats. This picture was taken when we were at a prison. It's a wonderful venue that's sort of usually used for airsofting. That's an old prison that's been sort of decommissioned and turned into a site for these kind of games. So when we turned up to something that looked like a real working prison. And of course, this was exciting to me because I knew that as a prison, it would have a prison library. Now, I was, unfortunately, when we sent out a group of people to go and retrieve these books, I was badly injured as a result of a zombie attack. And that's inconvenient, to say the least, for gathering new material. But the rest of the group carried on, and they went and they brought back a whole load of stuff from the prison library. The problem is, because they didn't have a librarian with them, they brought back everything. What you can't quite make out is this, which is not only is it a copy of 50 Shades of Grey, a book which I would say I don't need in the library, but I don't need to preserve for humanity because there are millions of copies out there. But also, that is 50 Shades of Grey in Swedish, a language nobody in the group speaks. But still, they brought it back, and then a nice pile of books was made, and I went through, and I think I saved about 3 books out of a pile of what must have been at least 50. And you know, the lesson here is really like go with the team and don't get stabbed, or train people to know what to look for. I think my mistake here was that people have got the impression that all books in the world now belong to me and my library, and so bring them to me so that I can carry them for them. And this doesn't work. So yes, I'm working on solutions that I think me going out is probably the better plan, and not getting stabbed is just generally a good plan as it is. We started an archive service as well. We find a lot of stuff out there, particularly a lot of documentation that is quite useful for us to keep. It's often in a very bad state, and you have to be prepared for documents that have been burnt or that are covered in blood, stuff that has been damp or mold. But some of this information could be really crucial to survival. I mean, I'm going to give a more concrete example of this later, but imagine in a sort of more traditional zombie scenario where the cause is some sort of virus. Imagine if you came across the notes of someone that had been working on that virus, but they were in a pretty bad state already. You carry them around, they fall apart, and you get to someone that could actually use them and do something good. You lose everything. So it's important to have ways to preserve this kind of information if you come across it. So I've started carrying a document preservation kit everywhere I go, along with all of the books and all of the kits I need to survive and food. Plastic wallets, cardboard files, a hole punch and treasury tags has turned out to be very useful. I was in a situation where I was desperate for paper clips at one point because we had massive stacks of paper that needed to be separated out. Someone brought me hair clips and like bulldog clips and stuff like that, and it was a lovely, moment where this tiny thing that I've taken for granted all my life suddenly became the most important thing I could possibly have. On top of that, sort of carrier bags, things like that, anything to keep the damp out, because you're going to be walking around outside in British weather quite a lot, and I wouldn't recommend that as a way to preserve your catalogue. The important thing about the library isn't so much the sort of the physical books of it; it's the community and how you're supporting them. This is some of my community. This is give you a rough idea of the size of the community I'm now serving. And there's quite a variety of people in there. But I thought I would talk about sort of 3 case studies of people who the library has supported in their work in the apocalypse. So this is Dr. Josh. Dr. Josh, as you might have guessed, is a doctor. And we don't have access to the sort of things that you would normally look up. And many doctors in this situation are now working on stuff that is a little outside their original specialism. So a lot of people are getting quite badly injured in this sort of situation. And so I made a special trip to pick up an atlas of surgical operations. Inside there, you've got a lot of diagrams of the human body. You don't have an X-ray machine. It's good to at least have a map of what you're going to be, what area you're going to be doing surgery on, what should be there. And that book is huge. It is big and heavy, but it's been determined of enough value that we carry it around all the time anyway. Also, big, huge, heavy books are useful if you need to beat a zombie to death. So having 1 or 2 in the collection isn't a terrible idea. Dr. Josh also put in a special request for these Jewish religious books. Serving the spiritual needs of a community is also important, I think, and so I did make a special effort to acquire these, partly for Dr. Josh's benefit and partly for the group's benefit, because Dr. Josh is also a wizard. And this turned out to be quite important, as you might expect when you have a wizard in your team. But by providing those books, I provided him with the information he needs to help the group with some of the more esoteric problems we found. And I've got a bit of a case study on this. So when we went to this prison, the prison turned out to be a gateway to hell, which, as if a prison full of zombies wasn't bad enough, there was worse. There was the gateway to hell situation. We found an awful lot of documentation there, lots of prisoner records and emails and things like that, that told a story of a prison that had really treated its prisoners badly. In this situation, we then actually met some of these prisoners who, it turns out, had died and gone to hell as a result of the things that had been done there. And we had teams of magical practitioners, let's say, who would go out and try to put these lost souls to rest. But to do that, they needed to know who they were dealing with, what sort of things they needed to say to them, to explain to them what had happened, and what sort of unresolved business they had to resolve. So we got all the scavenging teams would bring us every scrap of paper they found, went through every one of those, separated them out into little case files for each person, and then when a team was going out to go and put one of those souls to rest, I would be able to give them a pack and say, here is everything you need to know about this person, and they would run out and resolve that person's unfinished business and effectively save their souls, which is a nice thing to be able to do as a librarian, save someone's soul. There's a slight cautionary tale in this as well, which is when I packed up all of this stuff, and right, a job well done. We saved all those souls. We organised ourselves, and we got the job done. Right, pack everything up, put it all in the bag, and then I find one file that has slipped out of sight, and it is too late to do anything about it now. And so, document organisation, also important. Make sure that you have ticked off everything on your list, and that you don't leave something behind. I left a soul in hell, and that is something that I will have to live with. This is Casey. Casey is one of the leaders of our group and protects us from the zombies. I hide behind Casey quite a bit. It's good. He is quite intimidating, as you can see here. Casey is not much of a reader, or at least he wasn't when this all kicked off. He did request that I pick up some comic books for his daughter when he was going to go and find her. I think that may have been a way of telling me to pick up some comics for him. But the comics collection is good. The comics collection is actually quite important. You need to take rest where you can, and sometimes you're not going to have a very long period of time. And starting War and Peace is not necessarily something you want to do at the end of the world. So short form stuff like comics is actually quite good, good for the group. But Casey has also found himself thrust into something of a leadership role, which he wasn't necessarily prepared for. So he asked me to pick him up some books on sort of leadership and sort of confidence and things like that. This turned out to be a bit of a winner. Behind Enemy Lines, an autobiography of Britain's most decorated living war hero. Casey doesn't read books, really. I don't think he's ever read a book cover to cover before. He has read every page of that book, and wherever he comes across anything he can't normally deal with, he will ask for help with the words and that sort of thing. And just because things are falling apart, it doesn't mean that sort of everything ends. Sometimes people want to learn new things, learn new skills. And it's been a privilege for the library to be able to help with this and provide something that's really sort of seen him change as a person. I think it's really built up his confidence. And it's nice to see someone reading who doesn't necessarily do so much. This is Trish. Trish is another one of the tough people in the group. The shield she's carrying there is extremely useful to hide behind, as is she. Trish is lovely. She's helped out the library an awful lot. Trish is really a big fan of our poetry collection. That's it. That is our entire poetry collection. I did have a volume of Keats, but I think that got left behind in hell. Trish came up to me a little while ago and asked if she could write in the books. Well, not a huge fan of people doing that, but actually, yes. Well, I trust Trish. I know she'll do something good with it. I know she's not going to ruin anything. Yeah, absolutely, Trish. You can write in the books. Since then, this poetry book has had additions added to it. Trisha's added her own poetry, and so we've got this book of sort of pre-fall poetry that now has little scraps of poetry and song lyrics as well. We have spent quite a lot of time trying to reconstruct from memory the lyrics to Hallelujah, which if you try to do without looking up on the internet is actually quite a challenge. But she's recording some of that as well. And as I say, quite a few of her own works. And I love that the library's been able to help her sort of express creativity in this sort of trying time. And she's produced some stuff that's really quite beautiful, and it's a privilege to have the sort of pictures of it here to show off a little bit. So we're also, the library is very much seen as a symbol of hope. We're a sort of a beacon of civilization in an otherwise quite horrible time. And I think that's been the thing that's really sort of struck me through the most of all this, is that the library's inspired a lot of people to keep going in a situation where it's really been quite difficult, and that's really what's made it worthwhile. That's really all I wanted to say. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. If not, thank you very much for listening along. Yes?
Not really a library-related question, but what was written on your tie when you were...
Yes, well spotted. Let's see if I can bring that back up. Yes. So, that is, "What hath night to do with sleep?" Which is a quote from Paradise Lost. There was a person travelling with us who was actually the first ever patron of the library, first person to borrow a book from us. It was an academic called Jarvis, and he requested some books for us to get as well. Arguably, Jarvis had cracked a little under the strain of the end of the world, and his clothing was covered in quotes from Paradise Lost. I might be able to fish out a picture of that a bit later, because it is quite impressive. But when he died, someone brought me all of his books, including his notebook, where he made a lot of notes on what had been going on, and his tie. And in memory of Jarvis, I now wear that, which is probably a sign that I've started to crack as well. Yes?
When you talk about the library, you talk about us and we?
Yes.
Is it the royal we, or?
No, I do have people that help out with the library. Okay. There are a few people that help in a very practical, physical sense, in that they carry it when I'm tired. Mm-hmm. I thoroughly recommend recruiting people like that if you're going to carry a bag of books around for days on end. We've also inducted our first proper member of library staff, a chap called Professor Hannon. Professor Hannon is a ghost, and as a result of some situations, there was a danger of him being sent to a place not unlike hell. And I took it upon myself to save him from that fate, partly because nobody deserves it, and partly because Professor Hannon is an expert in the occult, a subject which we have rapidly decided has become something of a priority. And as such, we have discovered that it is possible for people who believe hard enough to do magic, and therefore I practiced the first known act of bibliomancy, where I bound him to the library as if he were an information resource, a categorization of which he is not overly fond, but he is now irrevocably bound to the library, and therefore I consider him a member of staff. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.